The freezing currents of the Charles River didn't just threaten to drown Hannah Grace. They threatened to bury a billion-dollar secret that half of Boston would kill to keep hidden. When the icy water filled her lungs, she thought it was the end. But fate had other plans, arriving in the form of a struggling single father with a mountain of debt and nothing left to lose. He pulled her from the edge of death, but he didn't know that saving her was the dangerous part. The question she asked him later, "Will you stay if I undress?" wasn't about desire. It was the desperate plea of a powerful woman stripping away her armor to reveal the target painted on her back. The wind off the Charles River in late November had teeth. It bit through the thin canvas of Caleb Holloway's utility jacket, finding the spaces where the warmth used to be. Caleb tightened his grip on the stroller handle. His 4-year-old son, Leo, was asleep, bundled in 3 layers of second-hand fleece and a blanket Caleb had stolen from his own bed. They were walking because walking was free. The heat in their basement apartment in South Boston had been shut off 3 hours ago, and the library didn't open until noon on Sundays. "Just a little longer, buddy," Caleb whispered, his breath clouding in the grey morning air. At 32, Caleb looked 40. His knuckles were scarred from years of turning wrenches at a garage that had laid him off 2 months prior. The shadow of stubble on his jaw wasn't a style choice. Razors cost money, and money was for Leo's inhalers. He paused near the railing of the Harvard Bridge. The city skyline rose like a fortress of glass and steel across the water, indifferent, expensive, and unreachable. Somewhere in those towers sat the headquarters of Grace and Associates, the private equity firm that had acquired the garage chain he worked for and promptly liquidated it. He stared at the water, churning and slate-grey. It looked angry. Then he heard it. Not a splash, but a gasp, a sharp human sound of surprise that cut through the traffic noise behind him. Caleb turned. 30 yards down, near a maintenance access point on the lower embankment, a figure was swaying. It was a woman. She was dressed in something pale, cream or white, that stood out starkly against the grime of the river wall. She wasn't dressed for the cold. No coat. Just a silk blouse and trousers. She looked at him. Even from this distance, Caleb saw the terror. It wasn't the look of someone about to jump. It was the look of someone who had been pushed, even if no one was standing behind her. Her heel slipped on the wet concrete. "Hey!" Caleb yelled, abandoning the stroller brake for a split second before stomping it back down. "Hey, wait!" She didn't wait. She crumbled. One moment she was there, a ghost against the grey, and the next she was gone, swallowed by the river with a terrifying lack of fanfare. Caleb didn't think. The part of his brain that worried about dry clothes, about who would watch Leo, about the phone in his pocket. It shut off. "Stay!" he barked at the sleeping boy, jamming the stroller brake harder. He vaulted the railing. The drop to the embankment was 10 feet. He hit the concrete hard, rolling to absorb the impact, stinging his palms. He scrambled to the edge. The water was black and churning. He saw a flash of cream fabric drifting fast, pulled by the undertow. He dove. The cold hit him like a sledgehammer. It seized his chest, squeezing the air out. Caleb kicked, fighting the shock. He opened his eyes in the murk. Nothing. He surfaced, gasping, thrashing against the current. There. A hand broke the surface, pale and clawing, 20 feet downstream. Caleb swam. He swam with the desperation of a man who had failed at everything else that year and refused to fail at this. The current was strong, dragging them toward the darker, deeper channel. He reached her just as she went under again. He grabbed a handful of silk. He yanked. She was heavy, dead weight, her limbs tangled. He hooked his arm around her chest, swimming backstroke, kicking for the access ladder. The water tried to keep them. It felt heavy, oily, and possessive. Caleb's boots scraped against the rusted rungs of the ladder. He hauled her up, his muscles screaming. He collapsed onto the cold concrete, dragging her body fully onto the ledge. She wasn't breathing. "No, no, no," Caleb hissed. He rolled her over. Her face was pale, almost blue. Her dark hair was plastered across her eyes. He brushed it away and froze. He knew this face. Everyone in Boston knew this face. It was on the cover of Forbes at the newsstand he walked past every day. Hannah Grace, the CEO, the woman whose signature was at the bottom of his termination letter. He shook the thought away. He tilted her head back, pinched her nose, and sealed his mouth over hers. He breathed. 1, 2. He interlocked his fingers over her sternum and pushed. Crack. A rib, maybe. He didn't stop. "Come on," he grunted, pumping her chest. "Come on, you rich witch. Breathe." 1, 2, 3, 4. Water erupted from her mouth. She convulsed, coughing violently, her body curling into a fetal ball as she retched river water onto the concrete. Caleb sat back, his chest heaving, shivering so hard his teeth clattered. Hannah gasped, her eyes flying open. They were green, sharp, and terrified. She scrambled backward, crab-walking away from him until her back hit the rusted railing. "Don't!" she croaked, her voice raw. "Don't touch me! I'm not—" Caleb held up his hands, showing his empty, scarred palms. "I just pulled you out. You were drowning." She stared at him, her chest rising and falling in jagged rhythms. She looked around wildly, at the water, at the bridge above, at him. Then her hand flew to her neck. She groped frantically at her collarbone. "It's gone," she whispered. The terror in her voice shifted to something else. Despair. "The drive, it's gone." "Lady, you almost died," Caleb said, his teeth chattering. "We need to get you up. Ambulance." "No!" The scream tore from her throat. She tried to stand but collapsed, her legs giving out. "No ambulance. No police. Please." Caleb frowned, wiping water from his eyes. "You just fell into the Charles in November. You have hypothermia." "I didn't fall," she whispered, her gaze locking onto his. The clarity in her eyes was chilling. "I didn't jump, and I didn't fall." Caleb went still. The wind howled around them. Up on the bridge he heard Leo start to cry. "My son," Caleb said, looking up. "I have to get my son." Hannah Grace looked up at the bridge, then back at the man shivering in a soaking wet utility jacket. She saw the poverty in his clothes, the desperation in his eyes, and the sheer brute strength that had just saved her life. "Help me up," she commanded, though her voice wavered. "Get me out of here. I'll pay you. I'll give you anything. Just don't let them find me." Caleb's apartment was a basement unit in a triple-decker that smelled of damp drywall and boiled cabbage. It was not a place where billionaires ended up. He had ignored her request to avoid the hospital initially, but when he tried to flag down a patrol car near the bridge, Hannah had physically fought him, clawing at his arm with a ferocity that scared him. She was terrified of the authorities. Caleb, having had his own run-ins with the system regarding custody of Leo, understood the fear of men in uniforms, even if he didn't understand her reasons. He had smuggled her into the back of his rusted 2008 Ford Explorer, the car he was currently living out of when the apartment got too cold, and drove her here. Now, she was sitting on his sagging beige sofa, wrapped in 3 wool blankets. Her wet clothes were in a pile by the door. She was wearing Caleb's oversized grey hoodie and a pair of sweatpants he had cinched tight with a shoelace. Caleb stood in the kitchenette, heating a can of soup on a hot plate. The gas was off, but the electricity was still running. Barely. Leo was in his room, playing with a plastic dinosaur, thankfully oblivious to the intruder. "Here," Caleb said, walking over and handing her a chipped mug filled with tomato soup. "It's not caviar, but it's hot." Hannah took the mug with trembling hands. Her skin was still pale, but the blue tint was fading. She looked small in his clothes. It was jarring. On TV, Hannah Grace was a titan, 6 feet tall in heels, armor-plated in Armani, cutting ribbons and firing executives. Here she looked like a girl who had seen a ghost. "Thank you," she murmured. She took a sip, wincing as the heat hit her throat. She looked around the apartment. She saw the peeling paint, the stack of overdue bills on the counter, the sheer emptiness of the space. "You're Caleb Halloway," she said suddenly. Caleb froze. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "You know me?" "I have a photographic memory for names and faces," she said. Her voice was regaining some of its steel. "You were a mechanic at the Dorchester hub. We acquired the asset 6 months ago. You were let go in the restructuring wave in September." Caleb let out a short, bitter laugh. "Restructuring. Is that what you call it? I call it, my kid needs medicine, and you took my health insurance." Hannah didn't flinch. She watched him over the rim of the mug. It wasn't personal. It was math. "Math doesn't feed my kid," Caleb snapped. The adrenaline of the rescue was fading, replaced by the crushing reality of who was sitting on his couch. "Look, Miss Grace, I saved you. You're warm. You're alive. Now tell me why I shouldn't call the cops. You said someone pushed you." Hannah set the mug down on the crate Caleb used as a coffee table. Her hands were shaking again. "My husband," she said softly. Caleb blinked. "Arthur Grace? The senator?" "He's not a senator yet. He's running," she corrected, "and he needs the Grace family fortune to win. But the fortune is mine. I inherited the company from my father. Arthur is just a figurehead." "So he pushed you in a river? He didn't push me." "His head of security did," she said, her voice flat, detached. "I found something. Accounts. Money moving from the company into offshore shells owned by a militia group in Eastern Europe. Arthur isn't just funding a campaign. He's laundering money for war criminals to boost his foreign policy credentials." Caleb rubbed his face. This was too much. This was a movie plot, not his Sunday morning. "And the drive? The one you lost? Encryption key," she said. "Without it, I can't access the proof. And without the proof, if I go to the police, Arthur will have me institutionalized. He's already laid the groundwork, leaked stories about my mental instability to the press. If I show up alive without that evidence, he'll say I tried to kill myself. He'll lock me away and take power of attorney over the company." She looked up at Caleb. "And he'll win." Caleb looked at the door to Leo's room. He couldn't get involved in this. He was a nobody. If these people could toss a CEO into a river, they wouldn't hesitate to crush a mechanic. "I can't help you," Caleb said quietly. "I have a son. I can't have heads of security kicking down my door." "I can give you $5 million, Hannah said. The silence in the room was deafening. The radiator clanked, a lonely sound. $5 million, she repeated. "Cash. Once I get access to my accounts." Caleb stared at her. $5 million. That was Leo's college. That was a house. That was never worrying about the cold again. "And what do I have to do?" Caleb asked, his voice low. "Hide me," she said. "Just for 2 days. There's a board meeting on Tuesday. If I walk into that meeting alive and sane, I can trigger a vote of no confidence. I can stop him. But until then, I'm a ghost. I have no phone, no cards, no ID. I need a place to stay." Caleb looked at the woman. She was shivering again. "You can stay," he said. "But you sleep on the couch." Hannah nodded, relief washing over her face. She stood up, the oversized sweatpants dragging on the floor. She took a step towards the bathroom, then paused. She turned back to him. The vulnerability was back, stark and unsettling. She began to lift the hem of the grey hoodie. Caleb stepped back, startled. "Whoa, what are you doing?" Her hands paused at her waist. Her eyes were dark, filled with a complex mix of shame and calculation. "Arthur. He likes to exert control," she whispered. "He says no one does anything for free. He says everyone has a price for their loyalty." She looked at him, her fingers gripping the fabric of the hoodie. "You saved my life. You're hiding me. I don't have the money yet. I don't have my cards." She took a breath, her voice trembling. "Will you stay if I undress?" Caleb stared at her. He realized then just how broken she was. This wasn't seduction. This was a transaction. She was offering the only currency she had access to right now. because she genuinely believed that kindness didn't exist without a physical cost. She thought she had to pay for her safety with her body, right here, right now. Caleb felt a surge of anger, not at her, but at the man who had wired her brain to think this way. He walked over to her. He reached out and gently pulled her hands away from the hem of the hoodie, pulling the fabric back down. "Keep your clothes on, Hannah," Caleb said firmly. "I told you, I'm not a businessman. I'm a dad. And in this house, we don't charge people for surviving." He turned and grabbed a pillow from his bed, tossing it onto the couch. "Get some sleep," he said, turning his back on her to wash the soup pot. "We have a long day tomorrow." Hannah stood frozen in the middle of the room, staring at the back of the man who had just refused the one thing everyone else wanted from her. For the first time since hitting the water, she felt something warmer than adrenaline. She felt safe. But safety was an illusion. Because 3 miles away, in a penthouse overlooking the frantic search boats on the Charles River, Arthur Grace was watching a drone feed on his tablet. He watched the grainy footage of a man in a utility jacket pulling a woman from the river. He watched them get into a rusted Ford Explorer. Arthur picked up his phone. "I have the license plate," he said calmly. "Find the driver. Burn his life to the ground. And bring me my wife." The night in Caleb's apartment was not silent. It was a symphony of poverty that Hannah Grace had never heard before. The radiator hissed like a dying animal, clanking rhythmically every 20 minutes. Above them, floorboards creaked as the upstairs neighbors paced, heavy, angry footsteps that vibrated through the exposed pipes in the ceiling. Hannah lay on the beige sofa, staring at a water stain on the ceiling that looked vaguely like a map of a country she didn't know. The wool blankets Caleb had given her scratched her skin, a stark contrast to the Egyptian cotton she hadn't realized she was addicted to until it was gone. She couldn't close her eyes. Every time she did, the water came back, the cold, oily taste of the Charles River, the sensation of the current grabbing her ankles, and then the memory of the railing, the look in the eyes of Marcus, her husband's head of security. He hadn't looked angry. He had looked bored. "It's just business, Mrs. Grace," he had said, right before he shoved her. She shivered, pulling the scratchy wool tighter. Across the room, the door to the single bedroom was ajar. A nightlight spilled a soft amber glow into the hallway. She could see Caleb sitting on the floor in the doorway. He wasn't sleeping. He was guarding them. Hannah sat up slowly. Her body ached, a deep, bruised soreness in her ribs where Caleb had pumped life back into her. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders like a shawl and padded barefoot across the cold linoleum. Caleb looked up as she approached. He held a small plastic object in his hands, a superhero action figure with a snapped arm. He was carefully gluing it back together with superglue, his large, scarred fingers moving with surprising delicacy. "You should sleep," he whispered, not looking up from the toy. "Adrenaline crash is going to hit you hard tomorrow." "I can't," Hannah whispered back. She sat down on the floor, 3 feet away from him, keeping a respectful distance. She remembered the shame of her offer earlier. "Will you stay if I undress?" and felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had tried to buy safety with the only currency Arthur had taught her men valued. Caleb's refusal had been a slap in the face, but a strangely gentle one. It had restored a dignity she didn't know she had lost. "Who is he?" Hannah asked, nodding at the sleeping form of the boy in the bed. "Leo," Caleb said. He held the toy in place, waiting for the glue to set. "He's 4. He likes dinosaurs and Spider-Man. And he has asthma that gets worse when the landlord turns the heat down to save a buck." "No." Hannah looked at the sleeping boy. He was buried under a mountain of quilts. "Where is his mother?" she asked. It was a personal question, an intrusion, but the silence of the night demanded truth. Caleb's hands stopped moving. He stared at the plastic figure. "She died 2 years ago. Ovarian cancer. Hannah felt a hollow thud in her chest. "I'm sorry." The treatment was expensive," Caleb cut her off, his voice hard but quiet. "We had insurance, but the co-pays, the out-of-network specialists, the time off work, it drains you. We lost the house first, then the car, then her." He finally looked at her, his eyes dark and tired. "And then your company bought the garage I was working at to pay off the debts, and they restructured me out of a paycheck." Hannah flinched. It was a physical reaction, as if he had struck her. She looked around the basement apartment, the peeling wallpaper, the drafty windows, the sheer, crushing weight of lack. This wasn't just poverty as a statistic in her quarterly reports. This was the result of the decisions she signed off on in glass conference rooms. Efficiency, synergy, liquidation. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I look at spreadsheets. I see numbers, reductions in redundancy. I never saw." She gestured to the room. "You didn't look," Caleb said. There was no venom in his voice, just a heavy, exhausting truth. "Rich people don't look down unless they drop something." He set the toy aside and rubbed his face. "Why did you really ask me that earlier? About undressing?" Hannah pulled her knees to her chest. "Because in my world, Caleb, nobody does anything for free. Not my father, not my husband. Especially not my husband." She looked at the floor. "Arthur. Before he decided to kill me, he spent 3 years systematically destroying my self-worth. He made me feel like an object, an asset. If I wasn't useful, I was discardable. I thought if I wasn't useful to you, you'd throw me back in the river." Caleb looked at her for a long time. The anger he had felt earlier softened into something closer to pity. He reached out, not to touch her, but to slide the repaired action figure toward her. "You're not an asset here," Caleb said. "You're a guest, and I don't charge guests." A heavy silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was a shared weight. "Go to sleep, Hannah," Caleb said gently. "I'm going to sit here until the sun comes up. Nobody is coming through that door." Hannah nodded. She crawled back to the couch. For the first time in 10 years, she closed her eyes and didn't check the lock on the door because she knew the man sitting in the hallway was a better lock than any steel bolt. Underscore, 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 underscore. Morning came with the harsh reality of daylight. The sun filtered through the small ground-level windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. Hannah woke to the smell of burnt toast. She sat up, her body stiff. For a second, she thought she was in her penthouse. Then she saw the pipes on the ceiling. "Daddy, who is the lady?" Hannah froze. She turned to see a small boy standing by the kitchenette table, holding the glued action figure. He had messy brown hair and eyes that were carbon copies of Caleb's. Caleb was at the stove, scraping black char off a piece of bread with a butter knife. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes like bruises. "This is a friend, Leo," Caleb said, his voice cheerful, masking the fatigue. "Her name is Hannah. She's going to stay with us for a couple of days. Remember we talked about being quiet while she slept?" Leo walked over to the couch, staring at Hannah with unabashed curiosity. He didn't see a CEO. He didn't see a billionaire. He saw a woman in his dad's giant hoodie. "Are you sad?" Leo asked. Hannah blinked. "Why do you ask that?" "Because you look like the sad princess in my book, the one who lost her shoes." Hannah felt a lump form in her throat. "I did lose my shoes, actually. In the river." Leo nodded solemnly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, shiny rock. "You can have this. It's a magic rock. It makes you not scared of the dark." He placed the rock in her palm. It was just a piece of gravel, polished smooth by a child's thumb. To Hannah, it felt heavier than the diamond engagement ring she had left at the bottom of the Charles. "Thank you, Leo," she whispered. Caleb walked over, handing her a plate with the scraped toast and a small amount of scrambled eggs. Eat. We need to figure out a plan. As Hannah took the plate, a sharp, authoritative rapping echoed from the front door. 3 heavy knocks. Hannah dropped the fork. It clattered loudly against the plate. She bolted upright, her eyes wide with panic. "Is it them?" she hissed. Caleb held up a hand, signaling her to be quiet. He motioned for Leo to go into the bedroom. "Go play, buddy. Close the door." Leo obeyed, sensing the tension. Caleb walked to the door. He didn't open it. He peered through the peephole. His shoulders relaxed, but only slightly. He opened the door, but kept the chain on. "Yeah?" Caleb said. "Rent's late, Halloway," a gruff voice barked from the hallway, "and Mrs. Gable says she heard a woman screaming last night. You're running a brothel down there." "She had a nightmare," Caleb said tightly, "and the rent is coming. I have a job lined up for Tuesday." "You had a job lined up last Tuesday," the landlord sneered. "You got 48 hours, or I change the locks and throw your junk on the curb, including the kid." The door slammed shut. Caleb stood there for a moment, his forehead resting against the wood. He took a deep breath, composed himself, and turned back to the room. Hannah was standing, pale and shaking. She had heard every word. "You're getting evicted," she stated. "I'm handling it," Caleb said, walking past her to get his jacket. "Because of the garage." "Because of life, Hannah," Caleb snapped, his patience fraying. "Look, I need to go out. I need to get Leo's inhaler refill and some food, and I need to see if I can get a cash advance from an old buddy at a body shop." "It's dangerous," Hannah said. "If Arthur is looking, if I don't go, Leo doesn't breathe," Caleb said. "I'll be careful. Stay away from the windows. Don't answer the door for anyone." He grabbed his keys. He looked at her one last time, his eyes softening. "Eat the eggs. You need the strength." When the door clicked shut, Hannah Grace, who controlled assets worth $4 billion, sat down on the sagging couch and wept. She wept not for herself, but because she had $5 million in her head, and she couldn't use a single cent of it to buy a frantic father a loaf of bread. Arthur Grace stood by the window of his penthouse, watching the city of Boston wake up. He was a handsome man in a conventional, polished way, jawline sharp enough to cut glass, hair perfectly grey at the temples. He wore a suit that cost more than Caleb Halloway made in a year. "Report," he said, not turning around. Marcus, the head of security, stood by the door. He was a block of a man, efficient and devoid of empathy. "The police are buying the narrative," Marcus said. "We planted the antidepressants in her bathroom. The suicide note is in her handwriting. Digital forgery is perfect. The press release goes out in an hour. Beloved CEO missing after struggle with mental health." "And the loose end?" Arthur asked, tapping his finger against the glass. "We tracked the Explorer," Marcus said. "Registered to a Caleb Halloway, South Boston, unemployed, widower, 1 kid." Arthur turned. A small, cruel smile played on his lips. "Unemployed, desperate, perfect. Do you want me to send a team to the apartment?" "No," Arthur said. "Not yet. If we storm a tenement building in daylight, it gets messy. Neighbors have phones. We need to be smarter. We need to flush them out." Arthur walked to his desk and picked up a tablet. "Mr. Halloway is a citizen of the digital age, isn't he? He has a bank account, a driver's license, a car registration, a life." Arthur tapped the screen. "Squeeze him," Arthur commanded. "Make his world so small that he has no choice but to run. And when he runs, he'll bring her to us. Underscore, 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 underscore." Caleb stood at the counter of the pharmacy on Dorchester Avenue. The fluorescent lights hummed with an irritating buzz. "That'll be $42 for the albuterol," the pharmacist said, looking bored. Caleb slid his debit card into the reader. He knew he had $60 left. It was tight, but enough. Declined. Caleb frowned. He pulled the card out and wiped the chip on his jacket. Sorry, chip's faulty. Try it again. He slid it back in. Declined. Card blocked. Contact issuer. That's not right, Caleb muttered. I just checked the balance. It says blocked, hun, the pharmacist said, tapping the screen. Usually means fraud or a freeze. You want to pay cash? Caleb felt a cold sweat prickle on his neck. I don't have cash on me. Then I can't give you the inhaler. Please, Caleb leaned in, his voice desperate. My kid needs this. I can bring the cash in an hour. Just let me take it. The pharmacist's eyes hardened. Store policy. No cash. No meds. Caleb walked out of the pharmacy, his hands shaking. He pulled out his phone to check his banking app. Login failed. User suspended. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in his chest. He dialed the customer service number. It went straight to a recording. We are sorry. This account has been flagged for suspicious activity related to an ongoing investigation. Investigation? Caleb stood on the sidewalk, the noise of the traffic fading into a dull roar. He felt exposed. He felt watched. He looked up at the electronics store across the street. A wall of televisions in the window was broadcasting the local news. He saw her face. It was a photo of Hannah, but not the woman he knew. This photo made her look unhinged, hair messy, eyes wide, taken from a bad angle at some gala. The headline scrolled in bold red. Billionaire CEO Vivian Sterling presumed dead. Police suspect suicide. Husband pleads for privacy. Then the screen changed. It showed a grainy image from a traffic camera. It was his Ford Explorer. Police seeking person of interest in connection to disappearance. Driver of 2008. Ford Explorer seen fleeing the scene. Caleb's blood turned to ice. They weren't just erasing her. They were framing him. They were spinning a story where he wasn't the savior, but the kidnapper, or the thief, or worse. He ran. He didn't go back to the car. He knew, with a mechanic's instinct, that the car was compromised. If they could freeze his bank account, they could track his plates. Or maybe they had already done something to it. He sprinted 3 blocks to where he had parked. As he rounded the corner, he saw it. A tow truck was already there. A man in a high-vis vest was hooking chains to the Explorer's axle. A police cruiser was idling behind it. "Hey!" Caleb shouted, then stopped himself. He ducked behind a dumpster. The cop was talking to the tow truck driver. "Yeah, seize it. Owner has outstanding warrants. Unpaid tickets. Just get it off the street." It was a lie. He didn't have unpaid tickets. Arthur was dismantling his life remotely, button by button. Caleb watched his car, his lifeline, his escape pod, get hoisted into the air. He thought of Leo in the apartment. He thought of Hannah. They were trapped. He turned and ran back towards the apartment, taking the back alleys, jumping fences, his lungs burning. He had to get them out. Now. Underscore, 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 underscore. Hannah was pacing the small living room when the door burst open. She screamed, grabbing the lamp from the table as a weapon. Caleb stumbled in, chest heaving, sweat dripping from his nose. He slammed the door and locked it, throwing the deadbolt and the chain. "We have to go," he gasped. "Now." "What happened?" Hannah asked, dropping the lamp. "Did you get the medicine?" "No medicine. No money." "They froze everything," Caleb said, rushing to the bedroom. He grabbed a duffel bag and started stuffing Leo's clothes into it. "Arthur knows who I am. He's frozen my accounts. They towed my car. The news is saying I'm a person of interest." Hannah stood in the doorway, horror dawning on her. "He's framing you." "He's hunting us," Caleb corrected. He scooped up a sleeping Leo, who stirred and whined. "Leo, wake up, buddy. We're going on an adventure." "Where?" Hannah asked, her voice rising in panic. "If they have your car." "We take the T until we can't," Caleb said. "Then we walk." "I know a place in the combat zone. An old garage. My old boss, Sal. He hates the Graces more than I do." "Caleb," Hannah said, grabbing his arm. "If we leave this apartment, we are out in the open. They have cameras everywhere. If we stay here," Caleb said, looking her dead in the eye, "the police, or Arthur's men disguised as police, will be here in an hour. They aren't coming to arrest us, Hannah. They're coming to clean up." The brutal truth hung in the air. Hannah nodded. She grabbed the oversized hoodie, pulling the hood up to obscure her face. She looked at the man who had lost his car, his money, and his safety for a woman he didn't know. "I will fix this," she promised, her voice fierce. "When this is over, Caleb, I will give you the world." "Just help me carry the bag," Caleb said. They slipped out the back door into the alleyway just as a black SUV turned onto the main street, slowing to a crawl in front of the apartment building. Caleb didn't look back. He held Leo tight against his chest, shielding the boy's face from the cold wind. They were homeless now, fugitives. As they merged into the shadows of the alley, Hannah Grace realized that for all her billions, she was now dependent on the street smarts of a man with $12 in his pocket. And for the first time, she noticed something else. As they ran, Caleb's hand kept drifting back to check on her, guiding her over broken pavement, shielding her from the view of the street. He wasn't guarding an asset. He was protecting a pack member. "Keep moving," he whispered, the sound of sirens rising in the distance. "Don't stop until I say so." They disappeared into the grey labyrinth of the city, just as the first snowflakes of a winter storm began to fall, promising to bury their tracks, or freeze them to death. The snow was no longer a weather event. It was a weapon. It swirled through the alleyways of South Boston, stinging eyes and burying the potholes that threatened to twist ankles with every step. Caleb carried Leo. The boy had stopped crying blocks ago, settling into a heavy, wheezing lethargy that terrified Caleb more than the screams had. Hannah walked half a step behind him, her head bowed against the wind. The oversized grey hoodie was soaked through, clinging to her like a second, freezing skin. They had been walking for 40 minutes. To Hannah, it felt like 40 years. "How much further?" she shouted over the wind. She wasn't complaining. She was calculating how long her legs would hold out before they simply folded. 2 blocks, Caleb grunted. He shifted Leo's weight. "Sal's salvage. It's off the grid. Cash only. No cameras." They turned a corner into an industrial dead zone. The buildings here were husks, brick skeletons of factories that had died in the 80s. At the end of the street, a corrugated metal fence surrounded a lot filled with the skeletal remains of cars. A single light bulb burned above a rusted side door. Caleb didn't knock. He kicked the metal door, 3 rhythmic thuds. Thud, 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 thud. A slide bolt rattled. The door creaked open a few inches, revealing a slice of a face. Weather-beaten skin, a grey moustache, and a suspicious dark eye. "We're closed," the voice rasped. "Get lost." "Sal, it's me," Caleb said, stepping into the light. The eye widened. The door was yanked open. Salvatore Sal Moretti, a man who looked like he was carved out of engine grease and resentment, stood there holding a tire iron. He looked at Caleb, then at the bundle in his arms, and finally at the shivering woman behind him. "Jesus, Cal," Sal hissed, ushering them inside and slamming the door against the wind. "You look like death. And the cops, I saw the news. They say you kidnapped a lady." Sal gestured with the tire iron toward Hannah. "Is that her? The billionaire?" Hannah pulled the hood back. Her hair was matted with snow, her lips blue. She didn't look like a billionaire. She looked like a refugee. "I wasn't kidnapped," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I'm with him." Sal stared at her, then spat on the concrete floor. "Grace, I know the name. Your company bought the lot next door. Turned it into a server farm. Evicted 3 families I knew for 30 years. "Sal, please," Caleb interrupted, his voice cracking. "Not now. Leo, he's bad." Sal's demeanor shifted instantly. The hard shell of the Southie mechanic cracked. He dropped the tire iron and rushed to Caleb, looking at the boy. Leo's breathing was shallow, a high-pitched whistle escaping his chest with every exhale. "Asthma?" Sal asked. Bad attack, Caleb said. I couldn't get the meds. They locked my cards. Bring him to the office. It's the only room with a heater, Sal commanded. The office was a glass-walled box in the center of the warehouse, cluttered with stacks of invoices from 1990 and smelling of stale cigars. But it was warm. Caleb laid Leo on the battered leather sofa. I need steam, Caleb said, panic rising in his throat as he watched Leo's chest heave. And caffeine. Strong caffeine. It helps open the airways. I got an espresso machine in the back that runs on jet fuel, Sal said. I'm on it. Sal vanished. Caleb sat on the edge of the sofa, unzipping Leo's coat. The boy's eyes were half open, glassy and fearful. Daddy, it hurts, Leo whispered. I know, buddy. I know. Just breathe with me, Caleb said, taking the boy's small hand, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Hannah stood in the doorway, feeling utterly useless. She controlled thousands of employees. She could move markets with a phone call. But here, in a grease-stained garage with a dying child, she was powerless. She watched Caleb. He was terrified. She could see the tremor in his hands. But for his son, he was a rock. He smoothed Leo's hair, murmuring soft reassurances, absorbing the boy's fear into himself. This is what a father is, she thought. Arthur would have called a doctor and left the room, because the noise bothered him. Sal returned with a steaming mug of black espresso and a bowl of hot water. Caleb propped Leo up. Sip this, Leo. It's going to taste yucky, but it's magic medicine, Caleb coaxed. Leo took a tiny sip and grimaced, but he swallowed. Caleb then held the boy's face over the steam of the bowl, draping a towel over his head to trap the moisture. Minutes ticked by. The only sound in the room was the hum of the electric heater and the rasp of Leo's breathing. Hannah found herself holding her own breath, her fingernails digging into her palms. Slowly, agonizingly, the whistling sound began to fade. The breaths grew deeper. Leo's body, tight with the struggle for air, began to relax against Caleb's chest. Caleb slumped forward, resting his forehead on the back of his son's head. He let out a long, shuddering exhale. Hannah walked over. She didn't say anything. She just reached out and placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. He didn't flinch. He reached up and covered her hand with his own. His palm was rough, calloused, and warm. He's okay, Caleb whispered. He's okay. Sal stood in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at the trio, the mechanic, the sleeping boy, and the CEO, and shook his head. You're in deep, Cal, Sal rumbled. I got police scanners running. They aren't looking for a missing person. They're looking for a fugitive. They got a BOLO out for you. Armed and dangerous. Caleb looked up, his eyes hardening. I didn't take her, Sal. Her husband tried to kill her. Sal looked at Hannah. He scrutinized her face, searching for the lie. He didn't find one. Arthur Grace, Sal muttered. Figures. The guy has eyes like a shark. He walked over to a rusted filing cabinet and kicked it to get the drawer open. He pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses. So, Sal said, pouring 3 shots. You got a sick kid, 0 money, the cops on your tail, and a billionaire wife who's officially dead. He slid a glass to Caleb, then one to Hannah. What's the plan? Caleb looked at Hannah. Hannah took the glass. She didn't drink whiskey. She drank vintage wine. But tonight, she threw the amber liquid back like water. It burned, grounding her. The plan, Hannah said, her voice gaining strength, is to steal my life back. But I can't do it without a car. Sal grinned, a crooked expression revealing gold molar. Later you came to the right place. But if you want to outrun Arthur Grace's security, you don't need a car. You need a ghost. The warehouse was a cathedral of rust, illuminated only by the harsh, sputtering arc of a welder in the far corner where Sal was working. The air tasted of ozone and old oil, a stark contrast to the sterile, climate-controlled world Hannah Grace had ruled just 48 hours ago. Hannah sat at Sal's cluttered desk, her face illuminated by the green glow of an ancient CRT monitor. She was unrecognizable. Gone was the pristine CEO. In her place sat a woman in oversized, grease-stained blue coveralls, her sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms smudged with dirt. She typed with a ferocity that seemed to shake the heavy desk, dissecting her own empire code by code. Caleb leaned against a stack of tires, eating a stale sandwich, watching her. He saw the transformation. The victim who had shivered in his arms at the river's edge was gone. This was a predator, sharpening her claws. "It's a fortress," Hannah murmured, her eyes never leaving the cascading data. "Arthur initiated the hostile threat protocol. I built it to keep hackers out. Now it's keeping me out." "Can you break it?" Caleb asked softly. "Not from here. The system requires a biometric override, retina and voice, from a hardline inside the Grace Tower server room." She spun the chair around to face him. "We have to go back in, but not through the lobby." She pulled up a schematic on the screen. The building sits on top of an old transit ventilation system. There's a maintenance hatch that leads directly to the sub-basement cooling units. It's tight, dirty, and dangerous. She looked at Caleb, her green eyes piercing. "You used to work for the Transit Authority. You know those tunnels better than the engineers who built them?" Caleb nodded slowly. "So I guide you through the rat's nest, and you crash the board meeting?" "Exactly. We walk in, I override the protocol, and we broadcast the money laundering logs to every screen in the building." Before Caleb could answer, the silence of the garage was shattered. Ring! Ring! The sound was jarring, a mechanical trill from a dusty rotary phone on the desk that hadn't rung in years. Sal stopped welding. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Caleb walked over and lifted the receiver. He didn't speak. "Hello, Mr. Halloway," the voice on the other end purred. It was smooth, cultured, and terrifyingly calm. "Arthur Grace." Caleb's grip tightened on the plastic until his knuckles turned white. "Grace." Hannah froze. Her hand flew to her mouth. "You are a resourceful man," Arthur continued, as if discussing a dinner reservation. "Sal's salvage. My algorithms predicted you'd seek help from former associates. It was only a matter of narrowing down which one." "If you know where we are, why aren't you here?" Caleb asked, his voice a low rumble. "Oh, the team is minutes away," Arthur said pleasantly, "but I dislike messes. So, I am offering you a choice. Walk out the front door. Leave my wife inside. Take your son and go. I will deposit $10 million into an offshore account. You can cure your boy's asthma in the Swiss Alps. You can live like a king." Caleb looked at the sleeping form of Leo on the leather couch. He looked at the peeling paint on the walls. $10 million. Safety. A future. Then he looked at Hannah. She wasn't pleading. She was just watching him, waiting to see if she was just another transaction. "And if I don't," Caleb asked, "then my team burns that garage to the ground with all three of you inside," Arthur replied. "A tragic gas leak. No witnesses." Caleb looked at Hannah one last time. He saw the woman who had worked beside him in the dirt, the woman who had been stripped of everything and was still fighting. "Arthur?" "Yes, Caleb?" "Go to hell." Caleb slammed the phone down so hard the casing cracked. "Sal, they're coming!" Sal emerged from the shadows, wiping his hands on a rag, his face grim. "I heard. We got maybe 3 minutes." "The car!" Caleb barked. "Is she ready?" Sal grinned, a gold tooth flashing in the gloom. He hit a switch on the wall. The overhead floodlights flickered on, revealing the machine sitting in the center bay. It wasn't a car. It was a weapon. A 1969 Chevrolet Chevelle SS, painted a matte, void-like black. The chrome was gone. The engine block sat exposed, a monstrous heart of steel and iron. "No chips, no GPS, no computer for him to hack," Sal said, tossing Caleb the keys. "Just 450 horsepower of American hate. Get the kid. Sal, come with us," Hannah pleaded as Caleb scooped up a groggy Leo. "I hold the door," Sal said, racking the slide of a pump-action shotgun. "This is my shop. I don't run. Go." Caleb threw Leo into the back seat, Hannah diving in to shield him. Caleb slid behind the wheel. The engine didn't start. It exploded to life, a guttural roar that vibrated in their chests. The bay door rattled open. Through the swirling snow, headlights cut the darkness. 3 armored SUVs blocked the alley exit, men in tactical gear spilling out. "Hold on!" Caleb screamed. He didn't reverse. He shifted into first and stomped on the gas. The Chevelle launched. It was a sledgehammer of momentum. Caleb aimed the steel nose of the muscle car directly at the gap between the SUVs. Metal screamed. Glass shattered. The sheer weight of the vintage steel smashed the modern plastic vehicles aside like toys. They burst through the blockade, fishtailing onto the snowy street, the rear tires spinning smoke and slush. As they sped away, Caleb glanced in the rear-view mirror. He saw the orange glow of a fire starting at the garage, and the silhouette of Sal standing his ground. Caleb gripped the wheel, tears mixing with the sweat on his face. They were alive. But the war had just begun. The boardroom on the 50th floor of Grace Tower was a sanctuary of silence and polished mahogany. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the snowstorm raged, but inside, the air was still and climate-controlled. At the head of the table, Arthur Grace stood with his head bowed. He wore a black suit, the picture of elegant grief. "It is with a heavy heart," Arthur said, his voice catching perfectly, "that I accept the board's motion to assume full control. Hannah's mental decline was a tragedy we tried to hide. But now, we must look to the future." The 12 board members nodded solemnly. The motion was seconded. The chairman raised his hand. "All in favor?" Boom! The double doors didn't just open. They were kicked off their magnetic latches. The room gasped. Security guards moved, but stopped dead when they saw the barrel of a shotgun, held by a man in a grease-stained jacket, leveling at them. "Sit down," Caleb Halloway barked. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a man who had driven through fire to get there. And then she walked in. Hannah Grace didn't look like a CEO. She wore oversized, filthy blue coveralls. Her face was smeared with soot from the ventilation shafts. She smelled of smoke and sweat. But as she walked to the head of the table, she looked more powerful than she ever had in silk. "Hannah," Arthur whispered, his face draining of color. "My God, you're alive. You need help. You're having an episode." "Stop," Hannah said. She didn't shout. She just dropped a heavy, rusted hard drive onto the mahogany table. It cracked the varnish. "Connect it," she ordered the trembling IT director in the corner. "Don't you dare," Arthur shouted, dropping the grieving husband act. "Security, remove these terrorists." "If anyone moves," Caleb said, stepping up beside Hannah, "I start breaking things, and I don't mean the furniture." The IT director plugged in the drive. The wall-sized monitors behind Arthur flickered. The company logo vanished, replaced by a scrolling waterfall of bank transfers. "That," Hannah pointed, "is the money Arthur stole. $400 million funneled to militia groups in the Balkans." The screen changed. It was a video file, not from a security camera, but from a phone. "And this," Hannah said, "is the voicemail you left Marcus while we were in the garage." Arthur's voice filled the room, cold and murderous. "Burn it. I don't care if the kid is inside. Just make sure she's dead before the market opens." The silence in the room was absolute. The board members looked at Arthur with horror. Arthur looked at the window, realizing the glass was too thick to jump through. "It's over, Arthur," Hannah said. "The police are in the lobby. I called them from the server room." Arthur slumped into his chair, a small, defeated man. Underscore, 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 underscore. An hour later, the storm had broken. The police had taken Arthur and Marcus away in cuffs. The press was swarming the lobby, but the boardroom was quiet. Hannah stood by the window, looking out at the city. She was still in the dirty coveralls, Caleb stood near the door, holding a sleeping Leo. "You should go down," Caleb said. "The world is waiting for the return of the Queen." Hannah turned. She walked over to him, stopping inches away. She looked at the man who had pulled her from the river, shared his food, and driven a tank through a wall for her. "I asked you a question the first night," she said softly. "I asked if you would stay if I undressed. I thought I had to strip to be worth saving." She reached out and took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "I was wrong. You didn't stay for my body. You stayed for my soul." Caleb smiled, tired but genuine. "I stayed because you're trouble, Hannah. And I guess I like trouble." "Good," she whispered, leaning her forehead against his. "Because I just fired the board, I'm taking the company private. And I'm going to need a new head of operations who knows how to fix broken things." She kissed his cheek, then looked down at Leo. "Let's go home, Caleb. I believe you owe me some toast." In the end, Hannah Grace didn't need a savior. She needed a partner. She learned that true power isn't in the money you hoard, but in the people you trust when the account balance hits zero. Arthur died in prison 3 years later, still claiming he was the victim. But Caleb and Hannah, they built something that lasted longer than any empire, a life. This story reminds us that sometimes you have to lose everything to find the one thing that matters, and that the strongest armor isn't a suit, it's the hand that holds yours when the world is burning. Wow, what a journey, from the freezing Charles River to the top of the Grace Tower. I want to know, if you were Caleb, would you have risked your son's safety to save a stranger? Or would you have taken the $10 million and walked away? Be honest. Let me know in the comments below. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories of betrayal, redemption, and justice, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a part. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.